Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and in today's video let's talk about the system changes between the Boeing 737 NG and the Boeing 737 MAX. This video is not a comparison between the iFly and the PMDG renditions of each aircraft, but I'm basing this video on the differences training that I've had when I transitioned from the 737-800 to the 737 MAX. So let's go right into it. We will talk over this on the sequence of the chapters in the AFCOM, so let's go ahead and start with the air systems. And in particular, if we have a look at the air conditioning panel, you can see that a couple of changes have happened to some of the lights over here. The old bleed trip off light has been removed and has been replaced with the bleed light that we can find on the 737 MAX. Now, the new light not only covers the previous condition where the bleed has tripped off due to excessive bleed at temperature or pressure, as it did in the 800, but it also covers two new features. On one hand side, it would illuminate if a failure within the bleed air system would be detected, which may not be resettable, and it will illuminate if an incorrect bleed air configuration exists after takeoff or go-around. In particular, once the flaps have been retracted following takeoff or go-around for at least 45 seconds, if the bleed air switches are still in the off position, then this light is going to illuminate to make the pilot aware that an incorrect configuration exists on the bleed air system to prevent decompression from taking place as the aircraft climbs. Likewise, if we go a little bit further up, we will find the new pack lights. Now, those have existed on the 800 as well, however, they have been enhanced on the 737 MAX to also indicate a failure where the flow control valve does not open when commanded on, and it would also illuminate to indicate that after takeoff or following a go-around, once the flaps have been retracted for at least 45 seconds, the packs are not in the expected position, again pointing to a possible decompression taking place because of pilot error. In other words, both the bleed and the pack lights have been enhanced on the 737 MAX in order to prevent for possible pilot error by configuring the bleed air panel, which has always been a problem on the 737 NG series. Last but not least, on this panel, if we move a little bit further up, you will notice that the ram air full open or the ram door full open lights have been removed from the aircraft, and this has simply been done because they have not been used in either normal or non-normal procedures on either of the types. So for this reason, Boeing has simply removed them from the flight deck. Since we are talking about the air system, we also need to talk about the equipment cooling and the smoke detection system, and a new light has been added to the equipment cooling panel, which is the equipment smoke light. Now, this illuminates if smoke is detected within the equipment cooling system, and it would extinguish again 30 seconds after smoke is no longer detected. Likewise, a new non-normal checklist has been created for this alert. Now let's move on to the anti-ice systems, and over here let's start with a little bit of general knowledge. On the 737-800 and the CFM56 engine, bleed air has been taken from the 5th and the 9th station of the engine compressor. On the MAX, this is different. On the LEAP 1B engine that is installed on the MAX, bleed air is now obtained from the 4th and the 10th stage of the compressor. And with that comes some changes to the operation and indication of the system in the 737 MAX. Now, first of all, you will notice that we have a couple of new lights over here. Amongst others, that is the engine anti-ice light that you can see up here, which did not exist on the 737 NG. And when this light is illuminated, it indicates that the engine cowl thermal anti-ice system has been inhibited due to a system failure, or when an engine core anti-ice valve fails closed. The engine core anti-ice system is one that we need to talk about because it didn't exist on the 737 NG. Basically, due to the new engine, a new anti-icing system has been introduced that anti-ices the core of the engine, and this is called, well, the core anti-ice. Now this system is fully automated by the electronic engine control and will turn on and off automatically without flight crew input or indication of normal system operation. Now let's go ahead and go to the next lights, and that is the cowl valve lights, which have replaced the previous cowl valve open lights that existed on the Boeing 737NG. Now, the reason for this change for the cowl valve lights over here is they fulfill a similar function, but Boeing has adapted the dark cockpit philosophy to a higher extent in the 737 MAX. Remember, when you previously turned on the engine anti-ice on the 737NG, you would get the blue lights illuminating first bright blue, then dim blue, and the dim blue would indicate that the engine and anti-ice valves are now open. Now this is no longer the case on the MAX. The MAX follows the dark cockpit concept, so when the switch is operated, the light comes up as the valve position disagrees with the switch position while the valve is in transit, but as soon as the anti-ice valve is opened, the light simply goes off to indicate normal system operation. You can verify that the engine anti-ice is indeed working by looking at the thermal anti-ice indication on the N1 gauge of the respective engine, and this is going to indicate that the anti-ice is operating normally. Now, the cowl valve light basically has a couple of small changes there. So it only illuminates momentarily, and if it illuminates steadily, then it indicates that the cowl anti-ice valve position disagrees with the related engine anti-ice switch position. So if this light comes on continuously, it indicates a fault in the system. If it only comes on temporarily, then that is normal system operation. Likewise, we have seen a change in the wing anti-ice. The previous left valve open and right valve open lights have been indicated with left valve and right valve, and it basically functions the same way. You switch on the wing anti-ice, they illuminate briefly as the valves transition, and when the valves are in the open position, the lights go out. Now, this means that you are no longer able to verify correct operation of the wing anti-ice system on any indication in the flight deck. It's simply when the switch is on and the lights are off, then we know that the wing anti-ice is operative, but you don't get any feedback of that anywhere on the gauges, contrary, for example, to the 777 that would give you wing anti-ice indication next to the EGT gauge. But this is not the case on the 737 MAX. So let's move on to the automatic flight and the flight control computers. So several enhancements have been made to the AFDS on the 737 MAX, and these include automatic disengagement of the autopilot following stick shaker activation, temporary removal of the flight director bars, an AFDS pitch mode transition following stick shaker activation, and the inhibit of autopilot nose-up trim when the airspeed is within the minimum maneuver speed amber bar. So let's make this one quick and short. Basically, if you are in an autopilot mode that does not offer automatic speed reversion, then you are going to get a disengagement of the autopilot when you are approaching the stick shaker activation, and the flight director will be removed from view until the stick shakers have stopped. Once you're out of the stall condition and the airspeed is above the amber bar, you are going to get your flight directors back, and the pitch mode can transition to a different mode than what was originally selected. The roll mode will, however, remain unchanged. Now, a couple of possible transitions here include: if you've previously been in altitude hold, it will revert to MCP speed so that you can pick some speed up again. Likewise, if you've been in VNAV alt or VNAV path in a level segment, it would revert to MCP speed, and all other modes are going to remain unchanged. Now note that the flight control computer logic on the 737 MAX inhibits autopilot nose-up stabilizer commands when the trailing edge flaps are extended or when the airspeed is 3 knots or more into the amber bar. Likewise, there has been a new feature added to the stabilizer out of trim light that we have over here. And on the 737 MAX, a cross FCC trim monitor provides additional protection against the runaway stabilizer caused by an erroneous flight control computer trim command. The FCCs continuously monitor each other's trim commands, except during a dual channel approach, where existing protections have been in place on the 737 NG already. In other words, the aircraft now has greater protection against a stabilizer trim runaway. So, there are no changes to the communication systems of the aircraft published by Boeing, so let's move on to the electrical system. Now, there have been no electrical system changes made to the 737 MAX, however the IDGs have been redesigned to incorporate the new engine, and this comes with an operational consideration. So, due to the new shape of the LEAP 1B engine, some engine components have been redesigned or adapted to fit around the new structure. The operational impact of this can be seen in the QRH when you're operating on a single IDG unit, so when you're using a single AC power source. Due to cooling requirements of the IDG unit, you will be directed by the QR8 to turn off the cabin utility, IFE and passenger seat switches up here, in order to aid with the cooling of the IDG by reducing the load. This will cause the cabin lighting to be extinguished, but the passenger reading lights will continue to work. It is envisioned that in the future this system will be redesigned and the requirement will be removed, but it exists at the current moment. So now let's move on to the engines and the APU, because this is obviously one of the major changes of the 737 MAX compared with earlier versions. So, the MAX is powered by the CFM LEAP 1B engine, which is available in 3 different power configurations. So on the airplane that we're in right now, we have a 28K engine installed, but it is also available in 27K and 26K, which is technically just the software derating the aircraft, rather than any actual physical changes to the engines. Together with the new engines, there have also been updated electronic engine controls installed on the aircraft, which incorporate 2 new automatic engine shutdown functions. The first is the engine electronic overspeed protection, which prevents a rotor overspeed from exceeding engine structural design limits both in flight and on the ground. If an overspeed event is detected, the EECs will shut down the engine. Now, the second EEC feature that is a thrust control malfunction accommodation logic, which is used to detect an uncontrolled high thrust event on the ground. If the engine thrust levers are reduced to idle on the ground and the engine does not respond to the idle command, the engine will be shut down by the electronic engine control. In other words, when you're landing and you're reducing your thrust levers to idle, if the engines don't run down to idle for whatever reason, the EEC is simply going to shut the respective engine down. Now, both of them are governed by the electronic engine control and will present themselves as an engine failure by announcing engine fail alert on the engine indications up here on the EGT gauge. Now, when starting the engine, the electronic engine control will initially maintain an N2 between 18 and 24% depending on certain environmental and engine conditions. The time spent motoring the engine is called bowed rotor motoring, BRM. The BRM is designed to straighten the rotor shaft, which will naturally bow due to the thermal buildup after the engine is shut down. So this is fairly easy to imagine. You've got that huge engine over here, and when you shut the engine down, obviously the warm air is going to rise to the top, and you will have cooler air at the bottom. This will mean that the fan blades that are located towards the top, the same goes for the turbine blades and the compressor blades, by the way, will be warmer and therefore show different characteristics than the one that are cooler at the bottom. When the engine is started, that air is going to mix and a cooling effect is created by the suction of outside air through the engine, through the motoring, and this in turn is going to bring the different fan blades to a different to the similar temperature, and this is what the airplane does over there. Now the BRM timing is variable depending on several factors, such as the time since the engine shutdown, internal engine temperature, ambient temperature, etc. BRM will be active for approximately between 6 and 90 seconds and is only active for engine starts on the ground. When BRM is active, a motoring indication will be shown on the N2 display during the engine start on the ground. Now, this indication will remain until BRM is no longer active, and after the motoring indication blanks and N1 rotation is seen and the N2 is at 25% or maximum motoring, move the engine start lever to the idle detent position for the engine start. When the engine start lever is moved to the idle detent, the EEC performs a functional test of the EOS and TCMA logic. During this test, the fuel flow will indicate 0 and the engine fuel valve will open and close repeatedly, which can be seen by the indications up here on these valves. So you will see them flickering when the engine is started up. The engine valve close light will illuminate and remain bright blue during this logic test and will extinguish when the test is complete. Once the test is complete, the engine start sequence continues. Now, due to the engine taking quite a bit longer to start, there is a new limitation on the engine starter motor. While on the CFM56-7 engines that were fitted to the Boeing 737NG, the starter limit is a maximum of 2 minutes, due to the longer start attempt on the 737 MAX, the limit has been increased to 3 minutes. Now, the CFM LEAP 1B engine has the following ground operating limitations. For crosswinds greater than 43 knots, the thrust should be limited to a setting normally used for taxi. Note that this is particularly important as you are doing turns, as we're talking about the direct crosswind component to the aircraft over here. So you might have, let's say, 45 knots of wind down the runway, but when you are taxiing to the holding point, when you're standing in a 90-degree angle to the runway, then this is a crosswind, so you need to limit your thrust to a thrust setting normally used for taxi. When the winds, however, are greater than 58 knots total, except when setting takeoff thrust on the runway, you must limit engine thrust to idle. However, due to the high gearing ratio of the engine, minimal thrust is required to commence taxi anyway, so taxi should still be possible. A new idle thrust has also been introduced to the engine, and that is icing idle. In addition to ground flight and approach idle, as you have it on the 737NG, the icing idle has been introduced, and that is the highest idle setting and is selected by the electronic engine controls in flight if the engine anti-ice is selected on and both the flaps and the gear are up. When in the icing idle mode, the EECs begin transitioning from minimum flight idle at 30,400 feet and increase idle in the descent to provide full icing idle at 22,000 feet. When we're looking at the engine display itself, you may have noticed that there are 2 additional lights on each of those sides. Let's talk about these now. So the first is the thrust light and the second is the fuel flow light. Now, neither of them exists on the 737NG, so this is exclusive to the MAX. The thrust light, located up here, is going to illuminate when the thrust is more than the commanded thrust, or the thrust is less than the commanded thrust, or it may be displayed in conjunction with the amber N1 command selector for the affected engine. Now, when the light is blinking, it shows that there is a condition of more or less than the commanded thrust. The alert, an entire block will blink for 10 seconds and then the alert only is going to remain steady until the condition no longer exists. So let's say, for example, that you're adding thrust over here and the engine does not respond appropriately, but it goes to a different thrust setting for whatever reason. Then the thrust light is going to come on and the entire block of lights is going to illuminate and start blinking, and after 10 seconds the thrust light only is going to illuminate. That is an attention getter for the pilot in order to show that there is a problem with the that there is a problem with the engine thrust. Now there is also a new light that is the fuel flow light located at the very bottom of the stack. Now this one likewise did not exist on the 737NG, and these lights are to alert the crew of a possible fuel leak condition. The fuel flow alert illuminates when the difference between the actual engine fuel flow rate and the FMC expected fuel flow rate exceeds a predetermined threshold value for 5 continuous minutes. An example of this would be an engine consuming 1200 kilos per hour when the FMC is only expecting the fuel flow to be 725 kilos per hour. Now, for an operational consideration here, ensure that the actual aircraft speed is entered into the FMC at all times to avoid nuisance warnings. So be sure that when you are down here on the VNAV page, let's say you are cruising at Mach 0.78, then be sure to also enter 0.78 in the target speed down here. Alright, so this basically concludes the differences in our engines. So let's go ahead and have a look at differences in the engine controls and the thrust reverser alerts. We can find the panel on the aft overhead up here, and as you can see, there's quite a couple of differences on the engine panel compared to the Boeing 737NG, which only had the reverser light and the engine control lights, while this one has the reverser command, reverser air ground, reverser limited, and engine control lights. So what is new and what differences do we have? The reverser command light comes up if the thrust reverse lever is not in the down position in flight. So the reverser command up here illuminates if you command reverse thrust in flight, which the aircraft is not going to allow. The reverser air ground light that you have next to this indicates a failure in the air ground system logic, which would normally provide you with protection against accidental thrust reverser activation in flight. Remember the Lauda Boeing 767 accident where the aircraft crashed because the thrust reverser activated in flight? That is what this system is supposed to prevent, and if it fails, you have a warning light for that now. Now next up we also have the reverser limited lights, and those illuminate when a fault in the thrust reverser system limits reverse thrust. The thrust reverser will not deploy, or reverse thrust will be limited to idle if commanded. Alright, let's move on to the next system, which is the APU. Now, this is probably one of the changes that many flight simmers will notice, because a gauge is missing down here on the overhead panel. And this is the APU EGT gauge, which has been removed, and a lot of the lights have also been replaced. So, or at least changed in their logic. Now, the APU EGT gauge has been removed because it simply is not operationally necessary. Now, on the 737NG you will find a blue maintenance light on the left. This has been removed on the 737 MAX as it is no longer necessary. However, an APU door light has been installed over here, and the door light indicates that the APU door is not in the commanded position. It may either be open when the APU is shut down, either in the air or on the ground, or in flight the door is not in the flight position, or on the ground it is not on the ground position. Now, a couple of different APU door positions exist on the 737 MAX, but I do believe that this would kinda go over the scope of what a video like this is supposed to do. Now, apart from that, there is a new operational consideration there as well, and that is due to the new shape of the LEAP-1 B engine. Some engine components have been redesigned to fit around the new structure. The operational impact can be seen in the QRH when you're operating again on a single AC power source, as we have talked about earlier, and this includes just operating on the APU generator. Alright, the next FCOM chapter is the fire protection, and believe it or not, there have not been any changes to the fire protection system of the 737 MAX. Following up would be the flight controls. However, as mentioned in the intro to this video, the flight control changes are so complex that I'm going to dedicate a separate video to them. So let's go ahead and move on to the next chapter, which is the flight instruments and the displays. Now obviously you can see that new displays have been fitted to the Boeing 737 MAX. Now they are not only larger, but also provide a lot of additional information. On one hand side, you've got your flight number and some general information like your cell call code, your tail number or registration, and the elapsed timer and the clock on the left hand side digitally over here. Likewise, the new attitude indicator has been fitted to the aircraft, and this new attitude indicator is actually equipped to give you some roll alerts as well. So if you exceed a certain angle of bank, you are going to be alerted and the airplane is going to tell you to roll into the direction where you will be closest to wings level. So it might say something like roll left, or roll right, together with some red arrows popping up on the displays. Now, the displays themselves do have a little specialty in that some stuff can overlap on the displays. For example, the speed bug might be overlapping with the green V1 indication below it, which can be a little bit confusing to pilots. However, that is something that Boeing currently has no plans to alter in their software code. Now, if a display fails, then you will have some switching possibilities located down here below the main panels. And if either panel fails, you can switch it over manually, for example to have both the PFD and MFD on the outboard display unit like we have it over here, or on the inboard display unit as we have it over here. Note that if you have it on one side and you transition the engine display over, then you are just going to get your standard display up here, but you will get a navigation display on the bottom side of the display over here. So that is quite a useful feature. Alright, moving on to our inboard display unit then. Let's go back to the normal display indication over here. You have already seen that we can switch the ICAS around. So we can have the ICAS either on the left side or on the right side, but not on both sides at the same time. It's either one or the other. In my former airline, it was SOP that the pilot flying would have the ICAS on his side so that he could handle the thrust with a quick glance. Now, the MFD control switches have been moved down to the pedestal over here, but they are still pretty much the same as they used to be on the 737NG. So the engine panel controls the additional engine display that you would normally have had on the lower display unit in the NG. The system panel shows the system display that you had on the 737NG as well, including the optional landing gear and flight control indicators. Now, on the real 737 MAX, unfortunately iFly does not model this in the beta version that I'm using to record this. You would also have a maintenance tab up here that you could access. But let's continue with what we have available in the aircraft here. And the next one is the info page, and that is a new one. So you will recall that on the 737NG you had the N1 selector and the speed reference selector available on the top of the panel up here. Now these have been moved to a digital setup now, and you can see that we have this cursor moving in a touchscreen manner on the iFly. In the real world this is operated a little bit differently, so you've got the selectors down here that you would use to operate those. And let's try to have a look at that. So I'm going to get the info panel up on our side over here. So the way you can do an input to this is you have the selector, which is used to scroll over the different options available here. And if we want to change, for example, the N1 setting from automatic to, let's say, a certain setting we want to do, then you would use the rotary selector, put it to both, and hit select, which opens up the input selector on the right. You click on that, and now when you rotate on this, you can basically make your selection. Once you're done, hit select again, and then you need to move the cursor down to the set button, hit set, and now you would have updated those settings. Likewise, you can manually insert the takeoff speeds as necessary over here, and you can do the very same thing by manually inserting the droz weight and setting yourself some speed bugs. Alright, let's return both of these to the auto position, like this. Alright, let's go ahead and close this panel, and then let's go ahead and move on to the EPHIS control panel, where a new switch has been added, which is the VSD switch. This basically does exactly what the switch is labeled. It brings up the vertical situation display. Something else that is new is that the range of the display is no longer shown up here on the range selector, but it is now shown on the top left of the nav display itself. And you can dial it down all the way to 0.5, which comes in handy if you have your airport moving map available on here. Another new feature is the so-called swath, which is the blue lines that you have next to your aircraft's track, and those indicate the portion of the display that is represented on the vertical situation display. In a turn, you will see the swath moving to the left or to the right in accordance with the aircraft turning to the side. What is new as well is an autopilot roll saturation alert that we can find on the primary flight display. Now, if the autopilot reaches the limits of what it can do, you might get an alert that is called out orally, roll authority. And this indicates that the autopilot is reaching 100% of the authority that it has. So it has turned the control column all the way to the side like this, and it is not able to hold the airplane in its position. If you are a fan of the air crash investigation documentaries, you'll probably have seen the, let's just call it spiral dive of that Air China Boeing 747, where an unexpected, unusual asymmetric force has exceeded the capabilities of the autopilot. When that happens on the 737 MAX, you are going to get an oral alert indicating that you have to take over and take control manually in order to relieve the autopilot. Now let's go ahead and have a look into the flight management functions, because there are a couple of changes to the FMC in the Boeing 737 MAX compared to the Boeing 737 NG. And we're going to start with the new progress page. The 737 NG had 4 progress pages available, but the MAX has a 5th one, and that is the fuel progress page. So on here, you first of all have the APU fuel used, and down here you can select whether you want to use the fuel quantity reading from either the totalizer or the calculated fuel. And you can simply select it by clicking the line select key next to it. On the performance init page down here, we have a new indication as well, and that is the fuel calculation up here. You can see we're using fuel sensed at the moment, but you can also go to fuel calculated or to the manual fuel input. And this can be changed on the progress page 5 down here. If we change to calculated, you will notice that this now shows on the performance init page up here as well. The difference between the two is that the calculated fuel is what the FMC estimates that it should have on board based on the fuel loaded on the ground, while the totalizer fuel is the fuel quantity that's been measured. Last but not least, you can also do a manual entry. So for example, if I enter 9 in here, come on iFlight, don't disappoint me. And this should have changed to manual, but looks like this is currently not possible in the iFly. We'll keep it at that. So, with this out of the way, let's go ahead and have a look at the changes to the aircraft's fuel system, because there are a couple that we have to take into consideration here. So first of all, let's start on the overhead panel with the fuel filter bypass lights. In the 737 NG, those would be extinguished if the fuel filter is operating normally and illuminated if you have an impending fuel filter bypass due to a contaminated filter. On the MAX, this has been enhanced to an impending or actual fuel filter bypass due to a contaminated filter, and if both lights are illuminated, then both lights will remain illuminated until the engine has been shut down on the ground. This might, for example, be the case if you have contaminated fuel on board, and in this case the lights are going to stay illuminated. The ICAS has also been enhanced with 3 new fuel alerts. Now, the first of them is the fuel disagree alert, and this would show an amber down here next to the fuel gauge. And this basically is a new alert, and it is shown when the fuel quantity is different to what is currently expected. So this alert is shown below the fuel quantity indications on the engine display, as well as the FMC CDU as a scratchpad message. A new non-normal checklist is associated with it, and fuel disagree is displayed when the totalizer fuel quantity and the FMC calculated fuel quantities disagree with one another. Next up, if you would get the scratchpad messages using reserve fuel or insufficient fuel that you can simply clear away and then later on not recall any longer, as per normal scratchpad message logic, you would now also get them down here on the fuel quantity indicator in amber, which would read using reserve fuel or insufficient fuel in order to keep you alert to this. Likewise, the low fuel alert has also been slightly changed to a slightly higher value on the 737 MAX, while on the NG the low fuel alert would come if the fuel tank quantity is less than 453 kilos or 1,000 pounds in each related main tank. The 737 MAX is going to trigger those alerts when you have less than 590 kilos in the respective tanks. So, that's the changes to the fuel system. The next system is the hydraulic system, but there are actually no changes to the hydraulic systems in between the two aircraft that are worth pointing out. So let's move ahead to the landing gear, and the landing gear has seen quite a redesign. So first of all, the nose wheel of the 737 MAX is quite a bit higher than the nose wheel of the 737 NG. This leads to the pilot sitting a little bit higher in the aircraft, but also to a slightly different attitude on the ground, which can be quite noticeable when derotating after a landing. So the NG is going to touch down later than the 737 MAX. The MAX will have the nose wheel touch down earlier than the NG. Now, the landing gear lever itself has also been changed and is now located right in the center. The biggest change is that the off position has been removed from the landing gear lever, so you only have the up and the down position. This is quite a significant change because it means that when the landing gear is up, 10 seconds after the gear is retracted, hydraulic pressure is automatically removed. However, if you fall back into the old 737 NG habit and you try to move the gear lever even the slightest bit down, it is going to extend your landing gear again. So if that happens, be sure to observe the landing gear limit speeds over there. You can extend it up to 270 knots and Mach 0.82, but in order to retract it again, you have to reduce your airspeed to 235 knots. So if an accidental extension happens shortly after the gear has been retracted after takeoff, it is usually not going to exceed any limits. But if you have already accelerated to 250 knots, you might have to slow down again in order to retract the landing gear again. So, last but not least, let's talk about the aircraft's warning systems. And this is one that you will be almost guaranteed to be asked in a technical pilot interview when you apply for a new job. And that is the proximity switch electronic unit light on the 737 NG, which has been replaced with a maintenance light on the Boeing 737 MAX. Now, the maintenance light is quite easy. It will illuminate when a system fault exists that must be reviewed by maintenance, and it is inhibited from the first engine start until 30 seconds after landing. And that's about as easy as it gets. Now, the 737 MAX is equipped by default with the Runway Situation Awareness Tool, or in short RSAT. Now RSAT is quite similar to what you are used to from the term RAS, Runway Advisory and Awareness System. It basically does the same things as RAS, but it is also equipped with an overrun warning and a speed brake warning. So many of these alerts are already on the NG, and on the 737 NG are provided by Honeywell. Due to a change in regulations in the near future, the MAX, however, has Boeing's own version of RAS, which is RSAT. In the air and on the ground, runway overrun warnings and speed brake warnings are included, and the RSAT concept emphasizes a three-pronged approach that includes flight crew procedure updates and a training aid to the flight crews as well as an airplane system change to assist flight crew in situational awareness. A great example of the new RSAT system is the runway overrun alerts and the and when it senses that you're about to overrun the runway to the end, it will make an oral call going max reverse, max brakes, telling the pilot that you now really need to use all means available to stop the aircraft. Likewise, it also features a speed brake warning. Oh, hello there. Likewise, hello twice. Likewise, it also features a speed brake warning, which is going to provide time-critical warning when the speed brakes are not deployed during a landing or reject the takeoff above 80 knots. So if you're landing, your speed brakes don't come up, then the aircraft is going to call speed brake, speed brake. So, together with the new RSAT system also comes a new page in the FMC, and that is what we can find on the approach page. So over here, in the NG, you only have that single page. On the MAX, you can see that there are two pages available. If you go to the next page, you need to select the runway braking action. And this can be dry. If it's dry, good. If it's just raining. And then anything else that may be reported on the ATIS or that you have figured out via the ARCOM tables. But make sure that you update your braking action over here so that those systems can function normally. Alright, and that is basically it. That's the system changes between the 737 NG and the 737 MAX. Remember, the flight control system will receive its dedicated video, as this one is already running for almost 45 minutes, so I really didn't want to blow this one up too much. Thank you very much for watching, thank you for staying all the way till the end. I hope that you found this one interesting, and last but not least, a small note from myself over here. While this has been a fairly detailed video, it does not remotely touch the complexity of the differences that you are getting taught when transitioning between the two aircraft in the real world. So that 2-hour iPad course, that famous one, lasts for 2 hours for a reason. Well, thank you very much for watching. I do hope that you enjoyed this one, and if you have any questions, if you're interested in more backgrounds, be sure to put it in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to it. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.